retract my comments in terms of the comrade from the Green Left. I think the comrade was absolutely correct that this massive crisis in capitalism is leading to a semi-bankruptcy of the capitalist state, and that the working class will be asked to pay very dramatically. And one of his alternatives was increasing social benefits. But I think we need to be a little bit more critical and look what the Green parties of Europe are doing. And I think the most dramatic example is what's happening in Ireland. A government commission has come out and proposed a number of things, but I'll emphasise two things. It's called for the cutting of 17,000 public sector jobs, which will be equivalent to 300,000 in Britain, and a 20% cut in child benefit. Now, families with large numbers of children are very poor. Child benefit is very, very poor. There's even a cap, they haven't implemented it yet. It's not exactly complete government policy, although the Green Party and the while are actually saying they support it. There's even a campaign you can read out in the Irish Times against that now. And it seems to me that, that if I was a Marxist in the Green Party today, I would be sort of discussing not just my program and my alternative, but the practice of the Green parties are implementing and supporting in Europe. I won't be too long, just to say this is not unusual. I think in Czechoslovakia the Green Party voted for charging fees for people to go to doctors, and they said it was a victory because they didn't have to charge for children to go to doctors. Just lastly, on this question of taxation, I think one thing missed out very much by Sean, and I think we should use it very much against New Labour. If you've got big portfolios of property and shares, the real problem tax is capital gains tax. It's not income tax. You don't have an income. You have a trading. Under Margaret Thatcher, up to the Lawson 1988 revolution, the taxation on capital, top taxation on capital gain tax was 60%. When Labour came to power, it was 40%. It's now 18% for entrepreneurs to a million. New Labour massively cut one of the most crucial taxes on the super rich. And that we should say that again and again, that is responsible for redistributing income and wealth.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. First of all, wonderful speeches. I enjoyed them very much, got a lot out of them. I'm going to be devil's advocate, if I may, slightly, on two areas, I think, of the debate so far, which I think might help the debate further this afternoon. Firstly, particularly in Ian's talk, I think, but as far as I know, there's no real research to fill in the details of what a distributive, eco-socialist point of view should be. Could it be that if the poorest people in the world, if there was redistribution towards the poorest people in the world, they had houses, hospitals, roads, schools, sewage systems, transport systems, and so forth, will that really mean a reduction in the impact of industry on the environment? And what does that mean in terms of reducing the lifestyle, if you like, of Western people? If we are supposed to sell these ideas, then at least we have to be realistic about it. I mean, and I had my own ideas about how redistribution would work and the impact of the rich and so forth. But it does seem to me that we have to base whatever we advocate on real understanding of what an impact of redistribution should be. Secondly, I think that all the arguments, we're a small group of thinkers and activists, we don't really have that much clout. And for instance, when Sean said we must take control of the banking system, I was looking around to see how many tank commanders there were. In fact, we can only do so much, and what we do must be smart, it must be geared towards undermining, demonizing, focusing our attention on the absurdities that everybody would agree with and understand, and making broad ideas about what can be done, what we should do, doesn't really help. Sorry to sound a bit negative.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I thought Rafi's contribution was really good, stuff about the Chinese economy, really in line with it. Also, I think I'm echoing what the last two speakers have been going on about, like, you know, talking about a program for a just transition economy. You know, you lay out broad lines of what wants to happen with the infrastructure. Now, I mean, Sean's speech didn't do that. To an extent, it was, you know, the stuff about the detail of what you do with the taxation system. That to a certain extent, that's interesting. But what was really lacking there was an understanding of agency, or like any real focus on it. Right at the end, we got, oh, and you know, masses of people must fight for these reforms. But actually, in the speech, while this program for what we would do with income tax was like being laid out, the only mention made, the agency which presumably Sean thinks is going to carry these reforms out, the only mention made for working class was that, oh, well, we've got to throw in something about guaranteeing jobs and pensions for workers in the green industry so that they all accept the program that we're bringing out. Now, I think there's this model of, we sort of cook up this immaculate program which we then export to masses of workers. But, I mean, it doesn't really work like that. There's this, you know, that's like Marvel says something about, you know, the economic plans of the Eastern Bloc kind of making detail at the top, and so like Marvel says, you know, life introduces chaos into their council chambers. Like, the thing is, in the class struggle, when you're developing a program, like, you've got to figure out how to go along. And it's got to, in large part, it's got to be formulated by the actors themselves. It's got to be formulated by the working class themselves. I mean, like, in June this year, myself and two other young members of Workers' Liberty went down to Vestas, and we started leafleting the workers there. And we turned up, like, we had like a vague idea of broad outlines of what we thought should happen. The plant should be nationalised. We thought the best way to do that would be to occupy the plant. But the actual detail of everything that the workers have said and everything that the campaign has said about energy policy was worked out in the struggle itself, was discussed by workers on the line themselves. I think if we want to be realistic about a serious policy that's actually going to be carried out by the working class, you know, it has to be developed by them themselves in struggle, not in our council chambers exporting immaculate detailed programs that basically produces what in the end. I think that thing about agency, ignoring the agency, is just a fatal flaw which made a lot of what Sean was saying at one point.
Thank you. I'm Tim Summers with Green Left. Somebody has to say this, so it's got to be me. Taking up the point of the last two speakers about a certain something lacking. You mentioned a lack of agency, you mentioned a lack of edge. This is certainly true. I just speak because I'm concerned that at the very time that we're considering a 1929 type crash after this particular blip, the formulations are so weak that all-important R word, revolution, is missing from the first two contributions from the platform. And that although Sean has put forward a lot of very good demands, none of which I disagree with, this is all the right sort of orientation, a practical orientation. Unless it's combined with a clear necessity of revolution, it will just be a kind of left reformism. That's just how it will end up. Because revolution doesn't develop spontaneously in the working class, but has to be induced by revolutionary Marxists. Sorry to have to play the old fundy, but somebody has to, and I beg you to reconsider the long-term effects of this kind of softly kind of political initiative.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, I think there's a great discussion to be had about actually what, you know, what is the nature of socialist agitation, and what kind of programs do socialists raise at times like this? Because actually, at a time like this, you don't raise the demand for socialist revolution.
Don't you? I do.
Thank you. but actually, what is socialist agitation at the moment is trying to raise demands that can bring people into action to win positive demands, which seem to be in their own interest. So the task is to propose anti-capitalist structural reforms around which you can build united fronts that build mass